Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Niall.
And this week, I'm
Sorry,
gonna need.
I straight up I was worrying because I think our upstairs neighbors set their fire alarm off, and I was trying to see if it was gonna be in the audio. It doesn't seem to be.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Oh, so I mean, we can leave this
over?
in. No. We can just leave this all in.
Okay.
I was gonna say, like, I'm gonna pass the bit over to you, and your bit was my neighbors are doing some loud noises, and that's just
Look. A thing that you got to know about my upstairs neighbors that I found out, the one that I've met is very nice, but they set off their smoke alarm like 3 or 4 times
lot.
a week, like
Yeah.
a ridiculous, like an ungodly amount.
Oh,
And I don't know why. Like sometimes it makes me want to go up and just like see if I can offer any help. Just
Yeah.
kind of figure it out, get everything under control.
yeah.
But no, they just continue to.
Well, You had called me the other day frantically. I was sitting around. It was about lunchtime, and you called me frantically, saying, "Look, my upstairs neighbors invited me over for their daily cigar smoking sesh, where they smoke about 5 to 7 cigars in one sitting. They usually replace like their lunch with that." And
Yeah.
you were going, and I was like, "That sounds kind of one. It sounds kind of unhealthy, probably." To just sort of like fill your apartment up with cigar smoke. But 2, that sounds like it's going to set the alarms off. And you're like, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's a problem. And I was like, all right.
Look, I was too I was too optimistic.
Yeah.
What you got to know about my upstairs neighbors is it's a 2-bedroom apartment, and 1.5 of those bathrooms have been converted into a large humidor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is a big thing about them. No, but I don't think so. If for some reason, I'm gonna try to make sure it isn't in there. But if you ever hear a smoke alarm in the background, I'm not on fire.
It's just the
my
cigar
upstairs
smoking.
neighbor just are real big into chomping stogies. So
That's a very funny concept to me. But I do recall a
it's not
time.
a concept; it's a reality.
Or sorry, it's a very funny reality to me. But I do remember there was one time you weren't involved in this, but
Okay.
back when we lived in Muncie, I was over at a friend's apartment, and he had like somehow gotten his hands on like I think decent cigars or something,
Okay.
and he was fully convinced that if you just like you could just smoke them in the apartment and it would be fine. I don't remember why why he felt that way. And if he listens to this episode, I still love him, but
Yeah.
it was also a very straight. And I mean, I'm equal to blame because I went along with it. We ended up like playing games and like smoking cigars. And within like 10, 15 minutes, we're
Yeah.
just like, oh, I'm feeling sick. This is terrible. And
Yeah.
we had to air that shit out.
I am not. I've smoked one cigar in my life, and it was with the roommate I had between you and you. And we bought them, and then like we made Manhattans, I think, and turned on like a Tom Waits record so we could hear
okay.
it and sat on our porch.
Just
That was
smoke.
pretty nice, but I
kinda fun.
like the least nice part of that was the cigar, just because
Yeah.
I don't find it pleasurable, really.
Yeah, you're a cigarette guy as far
Yeah,
as you know.
I really just chain smoke
He's
fucking cigarettes all day.
That's funnier if you know how not of a cigarette guy Niall is. So I'm laughing, but so hopefully that context helps people out there laugh at that. Niall.
And Kyle's all about the snooze.
Yes, that's right. That's true. Which I believe is actually an established thing on the show, that I love the snus, and I'm packing it all the time. And I got jeans with can rings on the buttock.
Yep.
It's
you actually did a really cool thing where you put the can in both pockets, so it got like Mickey Mouse ears.
Yeah.
And then you like have like a face on the back of your pants, so you have like a Mickey Mouse thing going on.
Yeah. And the face is saying "slap here," which I run into problems when the cans are back there.
Yeah. Oh man.
Wow.
Okay.
Niall.
Yeah.
It's been a couple weeks since we last had a good old fashioned UFO episode. So
that is true.
I decided I wanted to take a look at some of the states in the US that we haven't looked into quite as much.
Okay.
Like you could think there's certain states in the United States that you could think of as being like UFO hotspots. So like a lot of places.
Yeah, your New Mexico.
New Mexico, yep. California,
yeah. And Nevada.
Washington.
Yep.
But so I kind of decided this week I wanted to look at our northerly neighbor, Michigan.
Oh, okay.
I found some interesting stuff.
I think we've done Michigan cryptids, but we haven't done any Michigan UFOs. That's cool.
I don't know if we've done UFOs or not, but this is a pretty important one as far as the canon of Michigan UFOs go, and ultimately important to the canon of UFOs in the United States in general.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't know in Michigan UFOs had cannons. That seems like a pretty big deal.
I kind of envision it as like each state has its own sort of like UFO canon.
Oh no, I meant like a big gun.
Oh, I mean, yeah, there is the Michigan cannon, which they fire into Indiana all the time. So like there's a whole area in like the sort of border between the two states that you just shouldn't go because you're liable to be hit by a giant cannonball, cannon fire randomly.
Yeah.
And it's legal in Michigan and it's illegal here in Indiana. And it's been a whole issue between the two states for decades now. But there's nothing we can do.
No, because they've decided that since it's the odds of being struck with a cannonball are less than that of being in a car, that therefore it should be legal, and that's just the law, baby.
Yeah, and honestly I can see their point. So
what am I doing? Go ahead and start. What are we talking about this week? I keep really fucking derailing us.
I kind of have a couple things that I'm talking about, but I have one main focus, and that is the Dexter UFO incident.
Oh, okay.
Where Dexter was like, Dee Dee, get out of my laboratory.
See, I was going to say this is a UFO that hunts down other UFOs.
Oh, like the serial killer, which, what's his name? Michael Hall?
Michael C. Hall, yeah.
Michael C. Hall? Yeah, that's,
Star of Gamer.
What if, that is notable role.
To me, it's his most notable role. Have you seen that dance scene?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen Gamer, unfortunately, and I might have
go
to
on
change
YouTube
that.
and search Gamer Dance. Okay, and just see what comes up.
Gamer Dance. Okay, let me see if I can find a good Gamer Dance before the end of the episode.
Siri save search. So, all right, Dexter UFOs. Gotcha.
Dexter UFO. Yeah. So we're going to start on March 14th, 1966 in the Lima Township of Michigan. So I'm going to not pronounce this correctly, so I apologize, Michigan, but the Washtenaw County Sheriff deputies, they're out and about doing their thing that they do, and they see, quote, 4 strange flying objects in the sky, and they're fast. Now, we also get sightings from law enforcement members of Livingston County, Monroe County, Sylvania, Ohio, and the Selfridge Air Force Base near Mount Clemens. And the reports come in as, quote, red-green objects moving at fantastic speeds, end quote.
So these guys covered a pretty large amount of ground if they were seen in that many different like counties and areas, right?
Yeah, presumably.
Okay.
And apparently that day, the U.S. Air Force and the Civil Defense start an investigation into these sightings. Now, 6 days later, March 20th, 1966, in the Dexter Township, right? Which is where the name comes from, if you were wondering. Not the serial killer, not everybody's favorite little cartoon scientist. This is a place in Michigan, I've been told.
But they do make a mean omelette du fromage.
They do make a nice omelette du fromage there, I have heard. Just little 90s kids jokes. This is our main character, Frank Manor, essentially. He lives out on a farm in a sort of swampy area in the Dexter Township with his family, his dogs. And the way he tells the story, he hears the dogs start to sort of freak out, and he steps outside to kind of tell them off. He steps out. As he's walking back in, he looks to the north, and he sees these colored lights. Now, Frank, with his son, they then run to sort of try and get a better look at this object, and then they can put together a report for the police. So Doug Harvey, the county sheriff at the time, says in an interview, quote, "We got a call that the Manors out in Dexter seen a UFO. So I went out there, and the grass was down flat in a round circle, and they said they definitely seen an object come down and lift off." Frank Manor himself would then tell reporters a bit later, quote, "We got to about 500 yards of the thing. It was sort of shaped like a pyramid with a blue-green light on the right-hand side and on the left a white light. I didn't see no antenna or porthole. The body was like a yellowish coral rock and looked like it had holes in it, sort of like if you took a piece of cardboard box and split it open. You couldn't see it too good because it was surrounded with heat waves like you see on the desert. The white light turned to a blood red as we got close to it, and Ron," that's Frank Manor's son, "said, 'Look at that horrible thing.'"
I mean, look, he's a man of many words. He's a real poet. That's a great description of this. Like, I kind of get the reaction, but so far nothing has seemed horrible about this. It's just kind of like weird or cool, you know?
Yeah, I think it's just alarming, the colors and it touching down, because it supposedly touches down in their front yard. Approximately in their front yard. I mean, this is wooded swampland on a farm. So, like, I kind of got the impression that there's, like, they had to go a bit of a distance to get to the thing, and there were some wooded spots that it was in, but it's because he talks about, at one point, it sort of, like, floating above the tree line. Okay. I think it's just alarming to see something with these weird lights and the heat waves sort of like touch down in what is essentially your front yard, which for a farmer is like really, really big, right? So,
yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so we now have touchdown.
Yeah. So we have an official police report on what Frank Manor reported. This same report would actually end up being the official report that's filed away by the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, better known as NICAP. So here's what this report says. Quote, "Frank Manor and his son, Ronald, plus 40 to 60 others, including 12 policemen, saw hovering over a swamp about 1,500 feet away, a brown luminous car-sized object with a scaly or waffled surface, cone-shaped on top, flat on bottom, or football-shaped, and two bluish-green lights on right and left edges that turned bright red and helped illuminate the object in between. Lights blinked out and the object reappeared instantly across the swamp 1,500 feet away. The whole object lit up with a yellowish glow at one point and also rose up 500 feet, then descended again. After 2 to 3 minutes of viewing, when 2 flashlights appeared in the distance, the object seemed to respond by flying away at high speed directly over the witnesses with a whistling sound like a rifle bullet ricocheting. Object remained in the swamp area for half an hour.
Huh. So it is just kind of hanging out, moving around, doing some little stuff. But then as soon as lights come in, it just takes off and disappears. But it was in this whole place for a half an hour.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have a little bit of details on the police officers who witnessed this. So Robert Hunewill, who was a patrolman with Dexter Police, he was one of the witnesses who saw this object sort of perform multiple flyovers of the Manor swamp, the area where the Manors live. And he describes it as having red and white lights, and they would change to a bluish sort of tinge at times. Now, while he's watching this, he claims that this one object that he had seen was eventually joined by 3 other UFOs, and that they all 4 flew off together.
Okay.
And then we also have sheriff's deputies, Stanley McFadden and David Fitzpatrick. They got to see this thing fly over North Territorial and Mast Roads. And they turned their spotlight on it. And McFadden was quoted as saying, "It was the size of a small house, kind of pushed down flat. It had red-green lights on it and movements which could not possibly have been made by any aircraft I'd ever heard of." Now, you know how this goes, because this received a lot of attention pretty quickly. It would eventually become national attention.
Well, of course, we have 12 cops, so you have to believe the UFO story, because
Right.
that's just how this stuff goes.
Right. But there are a lot of witnesses of weird shit in the sky, weird objects, and they are all pretty consistent as far as I can tell. Now, not all of them, like Hunewill's report on there being like 3 objects joining to create 4 that all fly off together. I didn't see that in a ton of them. But the colors and the shape is relatively consistent for the most part. But this story coming out results in the Washtenaw County Sheriff Office just being flooded with these reports of UFOs, and the officers just like couldn't respond in time to all of the accounts that were coming in of the unidentified aerial phenomena. And this would then spread out across the Midwest.
Okay. So this was the kind of the inciting event that led to a bunch of just getting swarmed with UFO stuff.
Yeah.
This started the whole thing, and then there was like a big tail of people freaking out after about it with their own UFO accounts. Okay.
Yeah.
I was making sure, because like sometimes you keep getting reports of the same encounter, like more and more people coming in and being like, "Oh, I saw it too." But if it's like a bunch of different encounters, that's a bit of a different story.
Yeah, and I watched. I'll have to. There's a video that you can find online actually, and let me just tell you what that video is titled. This is always, for me, such an incredible blessing when you have these weird old UFO cases that had some level of like TV coverage in the 60s or whatever. To have that archived on YouTube is somewhat rare, I've found.
Yeah.
Like there's like a special report or something, especially when it's like you leave the United States. I can't find that shit. But you can, if you look up on YouTube, Frank Manor's 1966 UFO sighting in Dexter, Michigan, you will find a 6-minute segment about the incident, including interviews with Frank Manor and people from around the area. Like they go and they talk to, I don't remember what college it was, but they go to like this women's college and they interview a group of like 6 women, and they're all just saying the same thing, describing this same UFO. They even, was it the coroner? It was like the coroner's the guy who like goes and he's like, "Yep, that's a dead body," right? Like,
there's sometimes, the coroner's office are the people that get the dead bodies. I think someone,
They use a different term than coroner. I'm trying. I forgot. I watched this video a little while ago, but something akin to the coroner. he just like is out exploring a patch of land with like a device to try and like measure electromagnetic frequencies because he also saw the UFO. So there's just like a lot of people who see this thing. So, you know, you have this incident that pretty quickly spreads in the area where it happened and then continues to like roll out to the rest of the Midwestern United States. It got some flack at first as being a hoax. And eventually the sort of criticism of it being a quote unquote hoax by the public, some people began to like, I guess, postulate that it was more like a mass delusion, which like we've kind of talked about how that does kind of work with some of these cases where like you get one report and then it blows up after the news is public and everybody seems to have a report. But what I think is different in this case is like the initial incident had a lot of witnesses.
Okay. So there's a, do you know, this is a thing that's kind of always hard to pin down.
Yeah.
But do you know, were all of them like reported on that night, or was it over time the reports came in?
I did not pin that fact down.
It's really, really hard to with stuff like this.
Yeah, especially the older that you go. I don't recall it saying explicitly whether or not it was all in one night, but I feel like they got multiple reports the night of.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Just based off of like how the people were talking about it. Like there's even like this it was like a Michigan like educational channel on like the history of Michigan where they have another 7-minute video like talking about this case, and they interview multiple officers who were witness to the object. And it sounds to me like at least the officers were witness to it the same night and the report the same night. So, but I can't say that for absolute certain, unfortunately.
That's fine. I'm just always curious because sometimes that information is just in the articles and stuff because people have dug into it.
Well, so. Not to jump too far forward here. Actually, we're about to get into this, but there is an official report that is in government documents about this that you could probably find online. Let me get to that. Basically,
okay.
We get more and more sightings pouring in. And eventually this leads to the U.S. Air Force stepping in. And it's 1966. So who do you think they got to go investigate this incident?
Are we talking Project Blue Book stuff?
Yep. Project Blue Book. Dr. J. Allen Hynek himself is coming to investigate this situation. And I guess Hynek sort of describes that when he gets there, the feeling about the UFO incidents was something, quote, near hysteria with the public.
It had whipped the public up into a lather. It had really got him going. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I don't need to get deep into Hynek here. Like, probably if you're listening to this show, you know who he is, and he's been brought up on a number of episodes. But the short and skinny of it is Hynek worked for the Air Force to investigate unidentified aerial phenomena. Project Blue Book has had multiple names and eras, essentially. They sort of are supposed to be trying to determine if UFOs are some sort of national security threat. And also they're trying to analyze the data of these reports of UFOs from across the United States. But what's important context, I think, here, it's going to be important to the story, is by 1966, UFO believers and people who have read about Blue Book and how they functioned, we're pretty firmly in the camp of the Air Force wants to shut down UFO stories with whatever explanation they can come up with.
Yeah.
They don't want the public thinking that there's something unidentified, flying around the United States doing who knows what. So Sheriff Harvey in Dexter recalls meeting with Hynek, and he says, quote, a Professor Hynek came to our jail and introduced himself. He said, I'm from Washington, and I've come down to inspect that site about the UFO. So I drove him out there, and he looked at it and talked to the manners. He got back in the car, and I said, what do you think? He said, I really don't know. I really don't know. Something was there.
Okay.
Now, Harvey goes on, and he says, quote, as soon as we got back to the jail, he had a call from Washington. He went in my office. 20 minutes later, he comes out of my office and he says, the press was there. We have definitely discovered that it was swamp gas. Hynek had suddenly gone from, I don't know what it is, to it was swamp gas in a matter of minutes, and that's where it died.
Okay, so after a call from Washington, he immediately just shoves it all under the rug and leaves. Okay, so
Yeah.
we got the swamp gas explanation.
Which I can't remember if it doesn't say specifically in the story if this is, and I'd have to do like I'd have to do a big nerdy dive, but this might be like the famous swamp gas case.
Okay, so this could be like the initial.
I don't
where swamp gas came from.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the first one, but I think it might be. But it is the most famous, I think, swamp gas explanation case.
Okay.
So now, fast forward a couple days. It's March 25th, 1966. Hynek is under pressure to go public with an explanation for what happened here. And he talks about how some of the recent sightings that people were reporting were actually just the moon and stars. And he says this at a press conference. And then he goes on to say that the Dexter sighting that the Manners saw and another one in a location nearby called Hillsdale, he says that this is swamp gas. And he explains that the swamp gas is produced by rotting vegetation. And we actually have what he said here. He says, quote, this gas can be trapped by ice in winter conditions and may be released in some quantity when a spring thaw occurs. No heat is felt and the lights do not burn or char the ground. They can appear for hours at a time and sometimes for a whole night. Generally, there is no smell and usually no sound except the popping of little explosions. Sometimes the lights are on the ground and sometimes floating above it. So,
okay.
Yeah, we've heard that this is an explanation that's classic for UFOs, but people have questions. So it's pretty quickly pointed out at the conference by reporters that a lot of the sightings actually didn't occur near a swampy area, which I guess Hynek at the time didn't even like try to explain those.
Okay. Because as long as you just deny hard enough, you don't have to explain like anything.
I guess so. Sheriff is one of our key sort of, Sheriff Harvey is one of our key guys for quotes on like how it went down with Hynek. And he says, with all due respect to Dr. Hynek, I'm not ready to accept this weak excuse of gas from marshes. And so he also tells the reporters, this is Harvey. Harvey tells reporters about Hynek's call from Washington and how that's how he kind of got rushed to make this public statement. And we have a quote here also from Frank Manner's wife, which unbelievably, the article that I got a lot of this information from, I realized refers to her as Mrs. Frank Manner. So she doesn't have a name, I guess. But she says, quote,
I see that happens a lot.
We've brought this up on the show before where like some family sees a UFO or a cryptid and they go to quote the wife and it's like Mrs. John Smith. And it's like, she has a name.
Yeah. There's a lot of cases of that just like you get the husband's name and maybe even kids' names, but a lot of times it's just an age and a gender.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
So I guess it was Mrs. Frank Manner who believed that there was something going on that the people weren't being clued in on. And it was a lot of the testimonials from Frank that he gave to like different news outlets that convinced people. Frank was quoted as saying, I spent time on army maneuvers in the swamps of Louisiana during World War II. I've seen plenty of swamp gas. This wasn't it. We saw what we saw, all right. This is sort of the public conception with most people. Like, most people are like, are you fucking kidding me? Swamp gas is your explanation. That is so we get a lot of public outcry about this explanation. This actually includes in the March 29th, 1966 edition of the Ann Arbor News, a person named Lawrence Espy, Dr. Lawrence Espy, who refers to witnessing a bright red light near Ann Arbor's VA hospital.
That was a stoplight, miss. You gotta stop at that. You're gonna kill somebody.
So this person is talking about how the craft is doing strange maneuvers that aircraft that we know of couldn't possibly do. And they also have independent witnesses verifying this guy's report. And so in the letter to the editor that Dr. Espy puts out, he doesn't mention that he saw this UFO, but he kind of like lays out his problem with the swamp gas explanation. So here are his questions for the swamp gas explanation. He says, why does it appear to glow rather than flame? Methane burns with a colorless flame. What determines the color of the ignited gas being observed around Ann Arbor? And, we've got so far white light, blue light, green light, red light. The Dr. Seuss menagerie of skylights here. And he also says, since gas normally has neither independent shape nor volume, but tends to expand indefinitely, what are the unnatural properties of swamp gas which allow it to remain as a dense, uniform sphere at altitudes over 1,000 feet? And what propels the gas during the rapid, unpredictable maneuvers commonly described by viewers? And why do spheres of ignited gas sometimes terminate in a high-velocity dive to the ground? It seems like a burning gas would rise.
Yeah, like, there are things about the whole swamp gas thing. I know swamp gas is an actual thing. It happens, whatever. But when it gets used for UFOs, it never fully accounts for what people claim,
If what people are saying, if they're being truthful, then it simply cannot explain these sightings. It just doesn't work. And I always understand the sort of like I'm a skeptic, right? Like I understand the desire to try and come up with a rational explanation for a lot of this stuff, but I think when you have like 40 some people witnessing similar lights, doing similar things in one area, and that those sightings don't match up with this swamp gas phenomenon, then it's like, surely we can come up with something better than swamp gas. But again, the idea here is that Hynek is being rushed. They really want to get an explanation out in the public to, I don't know, maybe calm the panic that seems to be building from all of this. So I don't know. But fact of the matter is, that is essentially that's about as far as it goes with the Dexter incident. Like, that's the story, and swamp gas is the explanation that's on the books. But we can look 10 years later to 1977 in Dr. Hynek's book, The Hynek UFO Report, which, Niall, if you'll look at the webcam, I happen to have right here.
Oh, you found it. All right.
Yeah,
cool.
I have a copy of one of the more up-to-date copies of the Hynek UFO Report. And there's some interesting stuff in here. So,
let me see that cover real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of a boring cover.
Yeah, it's not.
Unfortunately.
It's basically, it's published by MUFON, so shouts out to the Mutual UFO Network. I have the MUFON copy here. It's basically got like a Men in Black, but the face is covered, is gone, and in place of a face, it says the Hynek UFO Report, and it's fine. But the content's interesting. It's Hynek's words, which is always fun to read. And in this book, he talks about the Air Force and their predisposition towards wanting to cover these things up, wanting unexplained aerial phenomena to have the book shut on it, essentially. There's a lot of interagency disagreements which like we've talked about. I'm trying to remember which episode it was. I feel like it was one that I did like a 3-parter where like the Air Force was just fucking squabbling with a lot of other agencies. And he talks about how, given our advanced scientific knowledge at the time, the sightings' very nature and behavior had to be fictional. It had to be nonsense. It's and what I thought was very fascinating here is like I have this mental picture in my head of like the timeline of when Blue Book became the sort of like UFOs don't exist mouthpiece for the government. And I kind of pictured it like in the 60s, like by the like late 50s, early 60s, because we've got all like I don't know why, but that's where it was in my mind. But according to Hynek, it's like 1948.
Wow.
When the Air Force basically becomes the anti-UFO, like they have the anti-UFO stance baked into everything that they're doing.
That is much earlier than I would have thought.
So I wanted to read a brief page here, a brief segment here, because it's actually directly related to the Michigan incident that I'm talking about today. So here's what Hynek says, quote, "In the earliest days of the modern era of flying saucers, at the very inception of Project Sign, forerunner of Projects Grudge and Blue Book, there were two factions within the Air Force intelligence system. Those who believed that the mounting evidence was sufficient to take flying saucers very seriously, even to the belief that they were interplanetary spaceships, and those who believed that by no stretch of the imagination could the evidence be taken seriously. The latter group argued that with our advanced knowledge of the physical world around us, but by the very nature of things, these reports had to be nonsense. Rather quickly, probably because of the matter-of-fact nature of the military mind, the latter group won favor, and when Project Grudge replaced Sign late in 1948, the anti-UFO policy was set for all time. In the end, the Air Force got rid of UFOs altogether with a most helpful assist from the Condon Committee at the University of Colorado. Once the decision was made that UFOs had to be figments of the imagination, the Air Force policy on UFOs never changed direction. It can't be, therefore it isn't, became the guiding principle. And anyone associated with Blue Book, from director down, learned to follow suit or else. Even though the shifting winds of public opinion about UFOs often reached gale proportions, especially at such times of great concern as the Great UFO Scare over Washington, D.C. in 1952 and the Michigan swamp gas episode in 1966, the Air Force held firm like a rusted weather vane that stubbornly points in one direction only."
Huh. Okay.
So that's where they're at with this story. And so this seems to be by 1966, but much earlier, the actual government policy is that UFOs are not real.
When was like, I'm trying to think of get like kind of figure out a timeline here, because when was like Betty and Barney Hill? That was in the 40s, right?
I want to say it was like really early 50s. But I'm trying to remember, and I'm going to just give it a quick Google so that we can have the timeline here. It is 1961.
Oh, okay. So I'm way off. Okay. So they were straight up just like poo-pooing UFOs long before most of like the notable UFO cases.
Yeah.
It's like post Roswell, and that's about it.
Yeah, this would sort of suggest, I mean, post Kenneth Arnold, really.
Oh,
because
sure.
like Roswell wouldn't be as big of a deal until like a decade later, when or maybe it was longer, but because I covered this it was the UFO disclosure cover up stuff where I was basically talking about how like way after the fact Roswell would become a bigger deal when I'm not going to pull the name, but there was a book that was published in like I want to say like either the late
You're right.
70s or early 80s that turned Roswell into sort of the myth that it would become. But I think Kenneth Arnold is sort of like the trigger for a lot of this. So yeah, 1940, because like Kenneth Arnold was 1947, and then we would have the weird Maury Island incident that Kenneth Arnold investigates. So like 47 is what kind of kicks off the modern UFO myth essentially. And so yeah, just a year later, I guess the government was like, we're not really going to we're putting our foot down. At least the Air Force, as that mouthpiece, is putting their foot down about the existence of UFOs. So the important thing to sort of keep in mind with what happened here is a lot of people would kind of think of this incident as a turning point in UFO investigation vis-a-vis government transparency. The 1966 Dexter reports, at least according to Hynek, would result in Congressman Gerald Ford and Weston Vivian, who are both from Michigan, to call for a congressional hearing into the whole incident. And I even had at the video that I mentioned earlier about Frank Manner's interview, at the very end has a little audio clip from Gerald Ford referring to the Air Force's answer of swamp gas as being flippant.
Oh, okay. So there were people already calling bullshit on all of this.
Yes.
And getting upset.
Well,
Okay.
and the public was there was such a public outcry for the swamp gas bullshit, too, that I guess it just, you raise enough hell and you know, your congressman is gonna bring it up. So this also would sort of lead to the Air Force's control over UFO investigations by the government to start falling apart. Like it would become a more collaborative process up until Project Blue Book is shut down in 1968. So I guess the way that we sort of conclude this whole story is that we do not have a good explanation of what happened in Dexter, Michigan in 1966. The government gave a bullshit answer, regardless of what you believe. Like, I don't think aliens visited us, but like, it certainly seems to be that the swamp gas explanation is easily discredited. Even Hynek himself is sort of saying like, I don't like the government wants to cover this stuff up.
It really is one of those things where they really kind of fucked themselves there because they gave such a ridiculous answer that really doesn't okay, even let me just go into the furthest reaches of this thing.
Sure.
Even if somehow it is possibly swamp gas, the way that information was delivered and disseminated made everyone just feel like, oh, they're fucking with us. Like even if there's the slightest percent chance that is actually what it was, they fucked themselves.
Yeah,
they played themselves. It's the government just clamped it down and fucked up.
Yeah, and you know that's not like the only time that you can find in the history of UFOs in the United States where that sort of happens. But this is, I think, a pretty blatant one that pissed people off. Now, interestingly, I found a 2022 article in the Sun-Times News titled "Then and Now: Investigative Author Talks About 1966 Dexter UFO Incidents." By a reporter named Doug Marin. And he talks with this guy, author Ray Zemansky, about the whole incident being a government cover-up. So Zemansky, who is a retired Air Force senior engineer based out of Detroit, also a UFO author, he claims that with his analysis of the records in the area, he thinks that aliens flew their UFO across Michigan that fateful night. And he details his version, his alien theory, in the book Swamp Gas My Ass. So
look, it's a catchy title.
It's good. You can buy it on Amazon for like $15. I almost did it, but And I guess it's like a trilogy of books that this Zeminski guy wrote.
Yeah, Swampcast my ass, Swampcast my balls, Swampcast my shaft.
Swampcast my hog.
Yeah.
So yeah, you gotta get the whole series too
Yeah.
to like totally understand it all. But basically, his whole spiel with this book and this interview is he's comparing the eyewitness accounts that he was able to find with the official explanation that the government put out into, newspapers and interviews, and also in the actual Project Blue Book reports, which you can find online. So he says, quote, "I believe the reports are incorrect, claiming the Manners only got within 500 yards of the object and it was as big as a car. I believe that falsehood was generated because Frank Manor reported being near that UFO, and he went on to describe it in excruciating detail. He described the skin of this craft as waffle-like. Now, if it's as big as a car, only Superman is going to be able to describe it to such a fine level of detail if he's a quarter of a mile away."
I mean, that makes that tracks.
Yeah. Basically, he's just saying like total the discrepancies between the official report and what was actually said by Frank Manor is just too unbelievable. He refers to the fact that the UFOs were spotted at 8:30 p.m. and that sunset is actually at 6:47 p.m. So it would have been fully dark by the time the Manners saw the object. And Zeminski, his theory about how it blinked out and showed up 500 yards away, he says that he also found an article saying that they were within a couple hundred feet. And his claim is that, based on nothing really, is that this thing did a 500-yard quantum jump when they got too close.
Look, if you're gonna take a swing, you might as well swing for the fences. Like that.
Yeah.
If you're gonna just fucking go ahead and bring quantum fucking teleportation into this story.
The thing is, I think like there's probably discrepancies between the reports here, but to say that it made a quantum leap is pretty wild. But you're right, definitely swing for the fences. I mean,
it went back into Elvis's body and hung out. Or what was it? What is okay? Is there actually a Quantum Leap episode about the JFK assassination, or am I wrong?
You're asking the wrong person. And if there isn't one, there should be. That would be really good too. I've never watched.
I can't remember if that's just a bit that I've read about on like someone made a joke that there's this episode, or if it actually existed.
I genuinely don't know. Email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. Did that happen? Let us know. So Zeminski just is a lot of his thing here is saying that the Air Force's explanation that sort of renders the whole incident silly of swamp gas is part of what led to the public treatment of the Manners. Now, I didn't bring this up until now, but Frank Manor in his interview talks about how he was basically harassed by people who thought he was a crazy person. And he talks about regretting bringing up the story, which this is actually a classic sort of UFO moment here. For a lot of people is like UFO reporting regret, because the public, you have on the one hand public outcry that's sort of in support of the idea that like something got covered up here, something's weird, but people are also going to treat you like you're nuts. And he was not super stoked about that. And he talks about just like wishing he had never said anything.
Yeah, it is unfortunate how often that happens, that like the people kind of get burned. Either you start writing books and doing the UFO tour circuit, or you kind of get burned by it. And, get frustrated.
Well, Frank Manor specifically talks about having windows at their house broken and people climbing on their roof because he went out with this report. And so people just like were causing him trouble for whatever reason, because they think he's crazy. Or maybe they were like, well, this is the UFO hotspot, better get on the roof so I can get a closer look to the night sky. So Zeminski also brings up another mistaken fact, is that it's the way that the Dexter UFO incident is sort of characterized by the public is that it's like people running through this woods and swamp trying to chase these lights down. But he points out that Officer Robert Hunewill, he had heard the sightings come in over radio that night. So Hunewill, I guess, went and grabbed his wife. He picked up his wife to have her serve as a witness. And then they drove out to the north end of Quigley and Brand roads where all this activity was. And when he arrived, the objects had left. So it's kind of mischaracterized because Robert Hunewill is sort of referred to as like a witness, right? But I guess it was a lot more over the radio for him. And so while, like, basically after these things left, it was him and the Manners, a dozen of the Dexter Police Department deputies, and 35 locals just were searching the area trying to find whatever it was. Ziminski says, quote, "The objects then reappeared and hovered over Hunnewill's squad car, 4 in all. They did a little spin over the top of Frank Manners' woods, and then they took off. Another key then is that Hunewill, who was not searching the woods and swamp, saw the objects and reported they were no more than 1,000 feet over the top of his car." So the reports initially come in, and they actually don't see anything right off the bat, and they're not chasing down UFO lights. They just are very suddenly like witness to this weird event. I honestly don't quite know what Ziminski's trying to point out here, other than like we have the story isn't entirely accurate. Maybe he's sort of saying like if you describe it like they're chasing the UFOs down, then like details are like more hazy or easily dismissed because maybe they were. I don't really know what he's trying to say here, but that's kind of the impression that I got.
That makes sense that like all the stuff here is kind of talking about like distance and how like I could see it being they you know things are hazy because they were occupied trying to chase the damn thing. I don't know.
Yeah, which they didn't. So I guess that's the point. They did not chase anything down. They just kind of like were searching around. They suddenly see stuff, and then suddenly it's gone. So
okay.
By the way, the clip that I mentioned before was a Walter Cronkite clip.
Okay.
And that's also where the section on Congressman Gerald Ford calling for the investigation. That's where all that comes from. So it's a pretty big deal, this story. Ziminski goes on to say, quote, "The Southeast Michigan incidents made them hunker down. The government put on a show of openness, but it was still a cover-up."
I am surprised this got all the way to like Walter Cronkite. He's you don't normally get big name broadcasters talking about this stuff from my experience.
No, and I think too that's why this interview is like preserved at all online, is because there's a Walter Cronkite thing. The congressional committee that basically gained the charge of the investigation had questioned the Secretary of the Air Force, which was Major Quintanilla, who was in charge of Project Blue Book. And Dr. Hynek and a few other people were also questioned. But Ziminski points out that the committee did not know that they were being lied to as the Air Force stuck to. This is the Condon Committee, by the way. Didn't know that they were being lied to as the Air Force put out this like marsh gas explanation. Quote, "There was no follow-up except to get Edward Condon to undertake the study, which the Air Force used to get out of the business of dealing with the public about UFOs. The conclusion of the Condon report said these crafts don't demonstrate any technology beyond our knowledge," which the Condon report is sort of like, I guess I should have added some context for that. The Condon report was this report that was compiled that ultimately would lead to the dissolution of Project Blue Book, right? So,
okay.
Do you remember watching that in the TV show where it's like all these guys in a committee and they're like, "Is there any value to this Project Blue Book shit?" That's what that was.
Okay, I didn't remember the specific name of that thing, so yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, it was. If if you ask the UFO researchers, it was specifically Condon. It was his job to make sure Project Blue Book gets shut down.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
that after Project Blue Book is shut down, investigation of UFOs then fall on the backs of local law enforcement. So that's all the investigations on those things are just sort of being led by local law enforcement. Here's another thing that I don't think we've talked about on the show, but I've seen pop up before. While publicly the government, the Air Force specifically, does not talk about, like, they're like, we no longer have anything to do with UFOs and we don't research it. People like Zeminski believe that they continue to research these things based off of these declassified documents. Specifically, they point to an NSA document called JANAP 146, JANAP. So they never actually stopped their reports or investigations on UFOs. They just have like a new guidance in this document that would only be declassified like way after the fact to allow them to continue. It's basically, this document is supposedly evidence that would allow the government and the Air Force to continue their investigation without the Project Blue Book, like public facing side of things.
Okay.
So I didn't read the document. I'm going to be honest with you. It seemed long and boring. But that's sort of like what a lot of the UFO people will point to as being evidence.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the story of the Dexter UFO, but that's not where my little thing. And I tacked on a little extra story here.
Just a little bonus. It's like a little topper for your steak.
Yes, exactly. Think of this as
Is that? Anyway, go
think
ahead.
of this as like an au jus sauce for the steak, which was the Dexter UFO incident. I just thought it was interesting. This actually was a story that I ran into when I was looking around, and this is actually why I ended up landing in Michigan for my story, because I found this story about something called Project Michigan.
Okay.
And I got a lot of this information from a really great blog that I've referenced on the show before called The Saucers That Time Forgot. Incredible source of information from like the 40s through like the 60s era of UFOs. It's really great. So this is interesting. So on June 22nd, 1955, there is a UFO that's witnessed over a major metropolitan city. Thousands of people see it, and it gets reported as a flying saucer. The object, I guess, was actually posing a danger to air traffic, and the Air Force was forced to scramble jets to intercept it. Pretty quickly, it came out that this object was not a UFO. It was an identified flying object. It was a military experiment that got a little out of hand.
Oh, okay.
So the next day after the incident, United Press puts out an article that explains what happened. Quote, a big plastic balloon flowed across Cleveland and eastern Ohio Wednesday and set off a wave of flying saucer reports from citizens. 2 men are in it. The University of Michigan later reported that the balloon was a science project. It carried a crew of 2 men and was equipped with a radio transmitter. A helicopter caught this picture of the balloon over Middleburg Heights, Ohio, and there is a photo of it that you can see. Now, Project Blue Book does not have a file on it, but you can find an article from the Michigan alumnus from 1955 talking about this, and here's what that says. The article is titled Hush Hush Balloon, and it says, in the early afternoon of June 23rd, a member of the Ground Observer Corps in Cleveland noticed a pear-shaped object in the sky over that city and notified the Air Force, which dispatched planes from Youngstown to intercept the strange craft. A helicopter and several private planes joined in the scrutiny. Startled Clevelanders, meanwhile, were telephoning police and newspapers to ask pointed questions about flying saucers and spacemen. The object turned out to be a balloon containing 2 passengers. Eventually, it came to Earth on a farm near the Ohio-Pennsylvania line after narrowly missing a string of electric power lines. The 2 passengers, who were elaborately non-committal about their activities, were presently joined by a station wagon with Michigan license plates, which whisked them and their now deflated craft away from the spot. It developed that the balloon was one of several launched recently in connection with Project Michigan, a super-secret affair described only as battlefield surveillance. The balloon was launched near Adrian, Michigan, drifted lazily over Lake Erie, crossed Greater Cleveland at about 3,000 feet, and caused no end of concern among Ohio residents, the Air Force, and airport traffic officials who objected to the balloons occupying air lanes near the Cleveland and Youngstown airports during the busiest hours of the day. So it turns out that this thing was just a secret military balloon for some sort of surveillance project. And it got immediately sort of like laughed out of the press. It had like one day where it was in the news and then it was gone.
Okay.
This was just one of, I guess, many Cold War military projects where we're trying to fight against the Soviets for this like technological superiority. And we don't know what they were doing with the balloon, but we know about what it was being conducted for. So the Army Research and Development magazine in July 1964 describes Project Michigan. It says, Project Michigan, which is conducted for the Army by the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, is a continuing research program devoted to combat surveillance. What they don't emphasize is this was aerial surveillance, radar development, and also combat targeting apparatus.
So this the idea of there being UFO sightings around this base in particular seems like, oh, the government just is working on some shit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
I do love this. Is just I've seen when I was doing some research on UFOs and stuff that people are like, it's wild how there's so many UFO encounters near military bases.
Yes.
It's like the aliens are trying to keep track of make sure like we're not doing nukes or like we're not getting too advanced in our machinery, and it's like this is one of the most simple applications of Occam's razor. The government is working on some shit, guys. Come on.
What the whole story of Project Michigan is meant to point out and is noted about in the Saucers That Time Forgot is that one, military secrecy with this stuff, and you can talk about this with the 1966 incident. It just leaves an information void. Like, this is how rumors and speculation and paranoia and all those things sort of spiral out of control with a populace that is like living through a time where the idea of UFOs are really gaining traction. And furthermore, Project Michigan as a quote unquote flying saucer incident is one of a number of examples that prove that the military, despite what they say, is willing to conduct experimental test flights over populated areas. A thing they claim they don't do.
Of course they do. Come on.
This is all to point out that as weird as the 1966 Dexter UFO incident is, I'm always looking for a military explanation for these things. And I think, we don't know, but I get this feeling of like, whenever the government puts out a bullshit explanation like swamp gas, I'm like, what really happened here? Did somebody witness a government craft that they weren't supposed to during the Cold War? Mm-hmm. Is that what happened? That's where I always go.
Especially during the Cold War, like they're not going to admit to anything. Like, come on.
Yeah. So that's the Dexter, Michigan UFO and my little tidbit about Project Michigan that isn't directly related, but a little fun afterthought that, I don't know, makes me giggle a little bit.
Yeah.
Niall.
Yep.
Are you prepared for a big question?
Oh, boy, am I.
That's great because I forgot to write one.
I was honestly going to ask you. Yeah. Well, are you prepared?
Okay, but for real, I have the big question for you now. Niall, if the government were to launch a secret project that was based out of Indiana and would get confused by nearby populaces as being a UFO, mm-hmm. What do you think the Project Indiana UFO would look like?
Huh. That is an interesting question.
There's two really easy ones here, in my opinion.
Yeah, like a pork tenderloin. Yep. That's a big
pork
one.
Tenderloin would be a good one. So like you kind of have a UFO that's like got a domed top and a domed bottom, but then like just really just way over, like more than the domes on the top and the bottom can really handle. Sort of
just like it's proportionally the size of a dinner plate.
Yeah.
It's sized
What-
like circular.
I don't know if people are aware, but Indiana, we're known for our pork tenderloins, and we're especially known for the fact that our pork tenderloins are like bigger than the sandwich bread by like a lot.
Look, if you think everything's bigger in Texas, that might be true, except for pork.
Yeah, you ain't seen
because
nothing yet.
They're biggest in Indiana.
The other, but
they're
go
really
ahead.
good though.
No,
It's fucking good.
Yeah, you're making me want to grab one. We got a place like down the road that I could go grab a pork tenderloin if I wanted to, and I'm thinking about it now.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with it that it's going to be mistaken for a giant DVD copy of the movie Hoosiers. I think that people are going to like. I don't know what the thing would be, but I think like they're going to try to hide it by making it look like just a big old. I wish I remembered anyone in the movie Hoosiers. I've never actually seen it. I'm a bad Indiana person. That's why I left. And
Now is it like psychically projecting the cover of Hoosiers into the minds of people who witness it, or is it literally a giant disc with the cover art of Hoosiers on it? You know what I'm saying?
I think that it is the disc. And in Indiana, if you just see a disc, you assume it's a copy of Hoosiers.
Right, yeah. No, that's actually a huge problem living in Indiana, because I'll go to a store and it'll be like, oh, I'm looking for a copy of, I don't know, Jodorowsky's Dune, for sure. But I'm looking around and I'm looking at these shelves at Barnes & Noble, or, yeah, that's the one that's still around, Barnes & Noble, yep. And all I see are DVD copies of Hoosiers. I'm not seeing anything
honestly
else.
They should get up to Blu-ray, but far as Indiana's concerned, we don't even know if it's been released on Blu-ray.
I have no idea.
It could.
In my mind, it's always on DVD.
Yeah.
And then you just like walk away from the DVD shelves at Barnes & Noble, never bothering to look at them, because you can see with your Indiana eyes that it's all Hoosiers. But if you were to get up there and inspect it, you'd be like, oh, no, this is Despicable Me on Blu-ray. Yeah. What? Yeah. It's a weird filter that you get the longer you live here. So
it is.
You know what? The other really easy answer here is Nyla's corn. It's like a corn UFO.
Yeah.
Oh, I looked up and I saw corn. Wrap that in a neat little bow and ship it. Because
that one, that one's not exactly local to Indiana specifically. You can see corn in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So I figured I'd try to think something
that's fair.
It really just screams Indiana.
But people, when you talk about Indiana, that is like the thing people will bring up.
True.
So, but the tender, I like the tenderloin. I like the copy of Hoosiers. I don't think Indiana has any other identifying characteristics that I can possibly think of.
It has very few.
So
Crossroads of America, sure. Everyone drives through it. Good job.
Yeah. The other states do that too, so we're not that special. So, Niall, I think that's going to wrap up the Dexter, Michigan UFO incident. Are you ready for some business?
Yeah. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all your favorite podcatchers, from Stitcher to Google Play to Apple Podcasts to Spotify. If you listen to podcasts somewhere, look up It Gets Weird, and we're probably there.
Twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird. Yep, we're streaming video games, and I actually had a very positive review on my last stream, so go ahead and check it out. Give us a follow. It's a fun time. We usually stream on the weekends when we can. Email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. What would your state's misidentified UFO government project be? What? Please let us know. Give us a detailed backstory. Maybe just really lay in with the details. Write us a real essay, and hey, if you write us an email, you might get on the show. Who knows? Patreon.com/ItGetsWeird. We have a $2 tier and a $5 tier. At the $2 tier, you get access to the bonus show, It Gets Weird TV, where right now we're going through season 1 of the X-Files. And, we do a lot of different weird shows on there, but X-Files is currently the one that, that's right, our listeners chose. You get to choose from a poll what show we watch for It Gets Weird TV every season. So right now, season 1 of The X-Files, go check it out. But we also have a $5 tier where you get access to It Gets Weird TV plus another bonus show on the off weeks of It Gets Weird TV. So instead of just one episode every other week, you're getting bonus content every single damn week at the $5 tier. Whether you donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, you get access to our main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday, and you get to hang out in our Discord chat where we're just talking about all kinds of weird stuff, cryptids, UFOs, ghosts, everything under the sun. So check that out. We also have a $1 tier that's, you don't get anything out of it. You're just giving us a tip saying, hey, I like your show. Here's $1. Enjoy it. And if you can't donate, please. First of all, I do recommend that you do donate so we can keep growing. But if you can't for whatever reason, we understand. But do us a favor. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I'm Kyle signing out.